not have. God, this is not going to be easy.
All right. Gail, do you want to get started?
Yeah, I'm ready to get started. So I'm Gail Brewer, Manhattan Borough President. I'm in the car, so I apologize for the mask and for the bumpiness. But I do want to thank everyone for once again joining us at 3 o'clock on Tuesday. We're going to talk with two amazing people today who are been with us before, but who have an endless amount of really good information. And just as everything is changing in this world, their information is such that it needs to be updated, and that's why they're kind enough to be with us today. I think with vaccination and testing, we see the COVID numbers are dropping, vaccination numbers are rising, although the Times today said it's plateauing. That was what their word was. I don't know if that's true in New York, but it certainly is true nationally. And they feel like they've hit the wall in terms of getting more people to get vaccinated. That we'll see if that's true or not. We obviously know there's still inequities in different neighborhoods. We have some people on the call from the Mayor's Vaccine Command Center, and they can update us to where we are, how the mandates are working, and what the ongoing challenges are. We know that testing is still an issue. I always get both. I get people who have to wait for a test, and then the others who particularly go to the city centers and it's extremely well done and they do not have to wait. So that's probably the best thing to do. We also know people can get at home and the health department said that community groups can request testing bans. And I have to say, the city has been very responsive when we have asked for that. So without further ado, Matt Borden from the Vaccine Command Center, who's one of those extremely responsive city deputy commissioners, assistant commissioner, whatever his title is, he's always supportive. And I very much appreciate it. Matt, go ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Borough President. And as always, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk to you guys about where we are in terms of vaccination. I just want to pull this up because I was actually had the latest numbers and I wanted to make sure that I was able to provide you guys with them. And now I have 17 different screens open. So let me just pull this open. Okay, here it is. So it's been the vaccination in the city. It's been very successful, as you mentioned. Right now, which is remarkable, we're up to more than 11 million and almost 730,000 doses that we've given. We think that number is going to jump because the city is becoming confident that we're going to see the 5 to 11-year-old vaccine is going to be approved, hopefully as soon as November. And obviously that's going to be a huge jump. I myself have 2 kids. One of them is 8, and he asks me every day if the vaccine is ready for him. So I'm always happy about that. And I think that a lot of parents are going to be really happy to be able to get their kids vaccinated because it's very stressful knowing in the world that they're not. So we're really hopeful for that. We look in terms of all the kind of rates that we're talking about for hospitalization. You know, we're still seeing the rate per 100,000 New Yorkers is 0.75, which is a great indicator. And you know, the 7-day average is still about 1,000. So it's going really well. The mandates have gone really well. There really been very few folks that have been written up for businesses for not following through in terms of using your for proof of vaccination. And for the most part, obviously there are lawsuits that have been followed, and we've won a vast majority of those lawsuits with regard to vaccine mandates as we continue to climb the ladder. I don't have anything firm for moving forward about when they're going to announce other mandates, et cetera. I think for right now, we are where we are. But we obviously have been really pleased with where the numbers are. how receptive businesses have been, and overall just the folks like yourself that have been so supportive in terms of getting the word out and really seeing, all the sites that we've been at continue to get use. Obviously, we're in a lot of mobile sites now. We're continuing to show up whenever we can for if there are street events or if there's any kind of if there's anything else that's happening. Sorry, give me one second. We continue to have, we rely a lot on mobile units now, which you can see all over the city. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay. I can't see any hands, Jessica, because I'm on the cell. If you have any, I have to say one example of a question, Matt, would be the in-home testing kits. What's the status of those?
Okay. I don't have, but I can find out in terms of the increase and what specifically regarding the in-home testing kits.
Well, apparently other states or cities are giving them out, or that's what I read in the paper. So that would be one.
I also recently read that that the federal government is actually just is moving forward to releasing a lot more of those in-home tests. I know sometimes it's even hard to find them in the drugstore, so I can certainly ask about that.
Okay. And then I just didn't know if there are any. I did talk about plateau. I think that's probably national, not necessarily New York. But are there?
We've seen. We've been seeing ever since the mandates. I think folks have seen the increase that we're talking about across the city. Folks getting vaccinated. It's been very successful, and we haven't necessarily seen that plateau yet. There's still work to be done.
Okay, Jessica, do you have other questions? Because I can't see.
I think Barbara Rudder had her hand up. I'm not sure. Are you still there, Barbara?
She stepped away from her.
Okay, sorry. All right, I don't see any other hands right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would have another question, which are how are the sort of giving us a sense of how the in-home is working. I know the mandates are definitely working, but
the in-home has been great. The last number I saw was that we had given out more than 80,000 in-home doses, which is remarkable. I'm seeing if I can pull up the number, what we're up to now on in-home.
And then while you're doing that, the other question, of course, is how are we doing on the booster and the Pfizer versus
right now the only boosters for Pfizer. It's recommended that folks who got the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine and who are at risk for exposure, especially folks 65 or older, get the booster. Moderna is requesting that they to the FDA that they have their booster, which would be a half dose, be approved. That hasn't happened yet, so we haven't seen that. So for folks, so that's where we are in terms of the boosters, and then versus the third dose, which is folks that are more immunocompromised if you're on Moderna. And then in terms of the numbers, I'm trying to figure out if I can find the numbers of folks that have been vaccinated in home. If there's a bigger number than 80,000. I don't have that number in front of me, but I'm happy to.
Okay, well, 80, that's a big number and it's very appreciated. So and that's all good news. So thank you very much. I assume that as soon as all of the boosters are available, you'll have more information and lines and so on.
We'll continue. Again, the mobile units and will continue to be present. And I think obviously we're going to see a big, every time there's a new thing, we see there's a rush for it. And I think that, the population, the 5 to 11 population, that's going to be a big one. We haven't seen that yet. We've been, for 12 and older for some time now. We've been in schools, we've gone back. So I think that's going to be the next big one. And as soon as that happens, we'll certainly mobilize to make sure that we can vaccinate all those kids, which is really great, and save kids' lives and save parent lives and save New Yorkers. So it's really something I'm excited about.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matt Borden, as usual.
Sure, of course. And if there's anything else, just you can get at me anytime. You know that.
Okay. Our next speaker is George Sweeting, who's Deputy Director of the New York City Independent Budget Office, known as IBO. We're going to talk about employment. And I must admit, George, this is perfect. I just came in from an event in Central Park, And it was to do with labor and musicians and local 802. And Vinny Alvarez was there. And he gives, faster than I could, all the statistics about people who are not back to work and the challenges of going back to work, even though I know we're going in the right direction. So it is not something that is a definite. And I think the only way we can recover is to get people back to work, as we know. So I appreciate you being here again. And go ahead, George. Thank you so much.
Here, George.
I see his slides, right?
Right. Yeah. I think you're on mute, George, if you can just, unmute.
Okay,
There you go.
then I'll start over. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. Are you seeing the full screen slides? Which is
Yep.
what I'm.
Yes.
Yep,
Okay.
we're all set.
All right. So what I'm here to do today is provide some information on the recovery of employment in the city and to look at the differences in the trends among several of the major sectors in the city. And the story really is there's a lot of variation. I'll also offer some very tentative observations about potential future recovery in the various sectors. However, before focusing on the city and its sectors, I'd like to. Okay. Just talk very briefly about what happened if you compare what's happened in New York City with what's happened in the United States as a whole, or the United States actually minus New York City. And what this chart shows is employment in the city and employment in the rest of the US as a percent of the level of employment that was there in February of 2020. That's the last month really before COVID began to impact the economies. The red line is New York City, and the blue line is the United States minus New York City. And really the takeaway from this slide is that compared to the rest of the United States, the city lost a greater share of employment in the first few months of the recession. And so far, it's recovered a much smaller portion of the losses that it incurred. So the city's economy lost 957,000 jobs in just 2 months, March and April of 2020. That's an astounding number. I mean, people have never seen that kind of a fall in employment. It had been at an all-time high of 4.7 million jobs in February 2020. So we lost a fifth of that, about 20% of the employment that we had in February was gone by the end of April. Compare that to the US, where there was certainly a decline, and you can see that on the chart, but it's a smaller decline than the city experienced. The US had a drop of about a little less than 15% of its February employment by the end of April. And then there's been a slow recovery underway since April of 2020. And if you look between April 2020 and August of 2021, which is the latest data we have available, the city has added back or restored, recovered, depends on what word you want to use, about 460,000 jobs. That's 48%, or just slightly less than half of what had been lost. And in August of this year, employment was back to 4.2 million, which is about 90% of what the peak was back in February. So we're still down a significant part of what we lost. The rest of the US has regained about 3/4 or 77% of the jobs it lost in March and April. So we recovered a little less than half. They've recovered about 3/4. So this actually plots it out by major sector. And the chart shows the differences in the number of jobs from February 2020 by sector, by major sectors in the city at two different points in time. The blue bars is the difference between February 2020 and April 2020. So that shows for each one of these sectors how much the job losses were. And for the red bar is the difference between February 2020 and August 2021. So that's showing what we lost and then how much we've recovered, all in one number. So at the outset of the pandemic, the largest job losses were recorded in four sectors. Retail trade lost 115,000 jobs. Professional business services lost 98,000. Healthcare and social assistance lost 116,000. And accommodation and food services, which is been absolutely the hardest hit, lost 265,000 jobs in just 2 months. With the exception of the government sector, which at least for some of us, this is personal good news. All of the sectors remain below their 2020 level, except for government, which has actually recovered and now exceeds where it was in 2020. Now, if you think about taking those same numbers, but thinking about them in percentage terms, because you want to account for the fact that different sectors have very different sizes. Percentage gives you a different way of looking at it. Everything is set up the same. The blue bar is the difference between February and April. Red bar is February and August 2021 for each of these sectors. And the key point here is that employment in most sectors remains below 90% of its February 2020 level. As of the end of August of 2021. Although those above 90% include some of the city's largest, information, professional business services, educational services, health and social assistance. Among the large sectors, retail trade was one of the hardest hit, and you can see that both if flipping back to the numbers chart previously, you can see it measured that way and also measured by percentage. In April 2020, employment was only 66% of what it had been 2 months earlier, a loss of 115,000 jobs. And even by August 2021, it's only back to 85% of what it was in 2020. It's a difference of 50,000 jobs. So retail was certainly hard hit, but it doesn't really, the difference is even greater when you look at accommodations and food services. Employment there fell 28% from between February 2020 and April 2020. And it's still only at 64% of what it had been in 2020, in February of 2020. That's by far the lowest of any sector. And it still has 134,000 fewer jobs than it did before the pandemic. And if you just thinking about those numbers a little bit, the number of lost jobs in accommodations and food services by far the greatest in any sector. It accounts for 27% of the roughly 500,000 job difference between February 2020 and August of 2021. So just that one sector alone accounts for basically a quarter of the jobs that the city shows as lost since February of 2020. And it's even more striking when you consider that accommodations and food services, although important in the city economy, accounted for less than 8% of total employment before the pandemic, but now it's accounting for 27% of the jobs that have been lost. This is another way of looking at what's going on. This is the amount of jobs, basically, that the percentage of jobs that have been recovered as of August 2021 in each sector. So we're looking at the share of jobs in each sector that have been recovered so far from the initial losses that occurred in March and April. 48, as I said earlier, 48% of the citywide job loss has been recovered. Most sectors are bunched in the 40% to 60% range. professional and business services, information and transportation are all on the low side for recovery. And there's, if you notice, the financial services doesn't show anything on this chart, and that's because it's continued to actually shed jobs while all the others are recovering. And it's the only sector to do so. And financial services had been experiencing slow growth and even some months of contraction before the pandemic. And it has continued during this period when other sectors are recovering, which is, financial services accounts for, a large share of city's tax revenue. And this is certainly something to watch. Also, it's a sector that, along with professional and business services and information, where we may see early warning signs about the impact of the shift to work from home and its effect on city employment. Certainly, most of those pre-pandemic, most of those people worked in offices in the city, and whether that's going to continue is a very open question. As yet, I would say we haven't seen anything terribly alarming about what's happening in terms of whether people are actually going to come back and work in offices, but it's definitely early, and there's a lot to learn. So just very briefly, looking ahead, first of all, IBO's next economic forecast will be done in November. So whatever I'm going to say is it's really just broad trends rather than a detailed forecast. And I'll certainly admit that the crystal ball is cloudier than usual. There are so many unknowns about what's happening and what's likely to happen that it makes forecasting particularly difficult at this point. When last spring, which is when we did our last forecast, we were projecting that the city would gain 265,000 jobs during calendar year 2021, although that growth was also expected to slow over the coming years. If that projection proves accurate, then the city would recover its 2020 employment not until the third quarter of calendar year 2023. So that's quite a long time to be in deficit to your previous peak. And it actually appears that our forecast of 265,000 jobs for this year was probably a bit too optimistic. It's probably going to be closer to 200,000 than 265,000. As I said, we're going to release a new forecast in November, so we'll have hopefully a better sense of where that number is. But right now we're running a little short of where we would need to be to get to the 265. What does all this suggest for the next few years? I think these are pretty obvious points, but the New York City economy suffered a very severe blow. Much of the damage remains. Some sectors are recovering faster than others. Some sectors may not regain their February 2020 levels until after 2025, which is an extremely long time. Recovery for the accommodations industry. And here, the numbers I've been reporting include hotels and restaurants. But if you focus just on the hotels, it looks particularly difficult. It's dependent on, a recovery there would depend on the return of both international tourism, and there's some good signs there, but also business travel, domestic business travel. There's an awful lot of hotel business was done servicing people who came into New York for meetings, either to meet with investment bankers or to meet with to hold events in the city. And I think the experience everyone's had doing Zoom meetings and whatever, and the increasing cost of transportation. The city, the business travel may never return to its pre-pandemic level. That's an open question, but it's quite plausible. Retail trade was also weak before the pandemic, and it's been hit particularly hard with the lack of economic activity in central business districts. Further recovery there is expected to be slow, and by our projections earlier this year, they were not going to be back even by 2025 to where they had been in February of 2020. Professional business services and the information sector have been growing slower than we expected. We thought they'd be close to their 2020 levels in 2022, but now that may be delayed into 2023. I mentioned financial services earlier, and government has returned to its 2020 levels actually faster than we, or I think anyone else had expected. It's now, I think, 106% of where it was. Presumably that reflects the benefits of the federal assistance programs and stimulus programs that's put a lot of money into local governments, state and local governments across the country, and certainly into New York City. And that has allowed the city to replace lost tax revenue and therefore avoid some of the layoffs that many people had feared. And at least in some cases, it looks like there are some parts of government have actually been adding jobs. So I'll stop there. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Gail, you're on mute.
You need to help me with the questions because I can't see them. So go ahead if you have questions.
I think Diana Blackwell, you have a question? And
good afternoon. Thank you, everybody. Your projection, I believe you said that the deficit would recover in about 2023. Am I correct on what I heard?
That was our projection earlier this year, back in June, I guess.
Okay, so my question is, right now, a lot of people are not interested in going back to work because they're saying that the wages, even though they may be increased, are still not meeting the needs of the people. And they're also not getting the benefits such as health and other things that would make them want to stay. What are you projecting will change that will cause them to want to come and get employed again?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, one thing to keep in mind there is that I think that that argument was stronger when there were these supplemental unemployment benefits available that paid, they were paid by the federal government. And it was up to, I think, $600 a week. That was cut back to $300, and now it's, as of, I believe, October 1st, it went to $0. So to the extent that people were not coming back because they actually, their income could be higher drawing the unemployment insurance than working for a wage that they considered to be too low. The space to do that has narrowed significantly since the changes to the unemployment compensation.
Thanks. Amy Schwartzman, you have your hand up? You're gonna unmute.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you so much for the presentation. I work in the arts sector, and I was really actually surprised by the way it showed that the losses were not as great as other sectors and that it's come back more, because anecdotally, it doesn't feel like that's what's going on. So I'm curious if you could talk about specifically what you were looking at and tracking Because I'm assuming, is it just W-2 numbers, not considering any independent contractors, which are pretty high in that sector? And also at the beginning of the pandemic, the reason that the federal government was tracking and saying that unemployment losses were at least 1.5 times greater in that sector. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, the data we're using are collected by the State Department of Labor for the federal BLS. And, you know, we take their assignment to, you know, if the industry people are in is self-reported, and, you know, we trust that. So I'm assuming everyone we've got in that arts, entertainment, recreation category truly belong there, and we don't have people that belong there that are elsewhere. Yeah, this data would not have all of the independent contractors. This is the data that's associated with paying unemployment insurance, collections. So to the extent that there are people that are not in that, they are, you know, we would be missing that.
So just one follow-up on that, because people were collecting PUA who are the self-employed.
Right.
And so, but it wouldn't reflect those folks.
That's actually a really important question that we're trying to still get straightened out. You know, there was so much thrown into the system in the last 12 or 18 months now. And the swings were so massive that it's still quite likely that there are adjustments that will be made to some of these series, and you know, some of the numbers may wind up looking quite different.
Shula, you have your hand.
Yes, thank you. And George, thank you so much for being here. This may kind of be related to Amy's question as well, but you know, this week we've been talking a lot about kind of these new pop-up or gig economy businesses, including what I like to call like ghost supermarkets, which might be warehouses, they might not. And I'm not entirely sure, and it might be just a bunch are popping up, and we'll see who wins, and then some of them go away. It just made me think of the workers who are there and not really knowing their status. How does that information come across to BLS in kind of the gig economy world, and then therefore come to you as well?
Right. In the gig economy, a lot of it doesn't show up to them, or it hadn't anyway before, you know, the recent effort to get some unemployment compensation to those workers. In fact, you know, many people thought that was one of the reasons that the gig economy flourished, was because businesses figured out this was a way to have essentially employees who, you know, they don't have to pay unemployment for and collect do other bureaucratic work. So, you know, that was a problem before the pandemic, and it's a problem after the pandemic. And in terms of its impact on these numbers, you know, it's there. You know, there's no, you know, we're definitely missing some part of the economy, but you know, some of the programs that were put in place this year, this time, may actually wind up capturing some, or at least it'll give us some benchmarks for what that missing number could be, and we could begin to figure out how to parse it out into different sectors.
All right, Jessica, anybody else have questions?
I don't see any other hands.
Okay. George, I have one question. It is that if we go forward, I think IBO, mostly to your credit, says these are what the facts are, and then somebody else has to figure out, like Jose Ortiz Jr., how to fix the problem. Is that correct? So I understand what IBO's role is.
We'll, you know, if we think that there are problems with the way data is being collected or measured, that's certainly something that we regularly comment on.
Okay.
We maintain nonpartisanship and try not to take positions on policy questions. But
Absolutely.
we've always defined sort of process as something we can define on, or we can comment on and make suggestions, including how and what is collected, how data and what is collected.
The other question I had quickly is that women nationally dropped out of the workforce. Is that also true in New York City? And is that something that you capture, or certainly the national folks do? How does
Right.
that impact?
That we have no reason to think New York was different on that. We're waiting to see some of the census data that's collected, the American Community Survey in particular. The employment data, at least as it's released to people, people like our office and to the press, doesn't include that. Well, I guess they have some. They have some for some of their series. They have, but it's not comprehensive. But we're looking for the American Community Survey to take some harder looks at those
Okay.
questions.
All right. As usual, George, thank you very much for everything. And I know we'll be calling on you in the future. Thank you so much for years and years of service. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to help out.
Absolutely. Next is Jose Ortiz, who is the CEO of the New York City Employment and Trading Coalition. And I know that he has been with us in the past. We appreciate it. I also know that he and Jonathan Bowles and others have come up with some great ideas about New York City's employment challenges, how to address them, and also how to make sure that those who didn't have a chance in the last boom have a chance in this one for the recovery, which is incredibly important. Jose Ortiz, thank you. I'm also a big fan, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Borough President, and thanks for your confidence in fixing the entirety of the crisis as we framed it before. I'm excited to get ahead and start doing that. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jose Ortiz Jr. I'm the CEO of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. We're an association based here in New York City that represents today over 190 job training organizations that provide skills training and education to local New Yorkers. And we serve through our membership around 650,000 New Yorkers, making us the largest association of its kind in the country. We are essentially focused on a couple of very specific values. It's really around access and equity. So we always want to ensure that every New Yorker has access to a meaningful income, and market-driven talent development, making sure that we are building strong ties with the business community to ensure that they're getting the talent that they need to be successful. Our priorities, or our strategy rather, is always focused on convening, innovating, and advocacy. So the convenings that we host over the course of a year, we host around 50 plus small, medium, large scale convenings that support our members. And we've opened that over the last 18 months to other partners and organizations that are doing work around employment, as well as different businesses and business consortiums that obviously require a significant amount of support and that we can learn from in an effort to ensure that we are building New Yorkers to be the appropriate talent that they require. Through that, we learn a lot about what requires in terms of innovation throughout the sector, what we need to do better in order to be more effective, what type of services can serve New Yorkers in a more effective manner, and what scale to which we need to do that. Is that something that an individual program or different organization is required to do, or is that something that the city, state, or federal government needs to step into in order to provide a type of service at a large scale? And all of this work around convening and innovation is really meant to inform our advocacy. Our advocacy is focused on three very specific areas: it's people, community, and systems. So we're always ensuring, as I've already mentioned, that we are investing in all New Yorkers, particularly those that are most marginalized and have been systemically left out of opportunities to receive adequate training and employment. In terms of community, it's really about economic and workforce development alignment. We believe fundamentally that when a community is being developed or redeveloped or rezoned, and that the people who reside in those communities require the specific types of skills training in order to meet the jobs that are going to be coming online over whatever course of period of time, so that they can remain a part of the fabric of that community. And systems is really around how are we spending that money, where is it, what bodies exist to make sure that the money is being spent effectively by the organizations that receive the funding, but also being issued and allocated effectively by the government agencies that are tasked with doing so. In the chat, I've now dropped about 3 different reports that we've conducted over the course of the last 18 months that I think would be useful for everyone on the phone. One of which is actually the second, a follow-up report that we conducted which has a long title, but we've effectively called it COVID 2.0 report, which followed up on a report that we did about 2 months after the pandemic. And it talked about the impact, not just on the individual organizations that we represent, but the people that are being served. In particular, many organizations had to pivot, as you would imagine, to virtual services, something that they hadn't previously done in many ways, or at least at not the scale that they were conducting, or had moved to some type of hybrid form. Today, most of the organizations still exist in some type of hybrid fashion. So around 74% of the organizations that are part of our membership are doing something around virtual or hybrid learning, or have, transitioned entirely to virtual or hybrid learning. And around 22 additional percent are doing some of one or the other. Which leaves only about 4% of the organizations actually not transitioning at all, which is effectively because they exist in specific sectors that wouldn't allow for there to be virtual learning. They need to be more hands-on for that reason. The report that was provided just before I came on around, obviously, the job trends was pretty comprehensive. So I don't need to go into great detail, but only to say that the organizations that are obviously serving individuals in retail, hospitality, manufacturing, areas that were heavily hit, continue to be heavily hit, and had to make many different decisions and choices over the course of the last 19 months in order to remain online and serve the communities that they do effectively. Some of those organizations had to pivot for a variety of different reasons that were related to health concerns, and immediately had to do so for the purposes of ensuring that food security was continued to be supported for individuals in their community. Housing support was being provided, support around vaccinations. So they moved away for some short period of time away from the actual training because training wasn't required at that particular time in some of those sectors. Most of those organizations have come back online in the manner in which that I had previously described, but they continue to provide additional services. And around 10% of all of their revenues are still being provided for COVID-like support. So that's either around PPE, healthcare support around receiving and or finding vaccinations, things of that nature. So that is of increased concern for us, because obviously we do need those organizations, as many of which are human services organizations, to provide that support, but we also need them to continue to provide job training in order to get people back to work. So there is a long-term concern there that obviously needs to be addressed in that particular area. Some other things that I would just mention in general, things that were challenges but grew out of the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic required us to become much more technically proficient, not just as a sector, but as people, for a variety of different concerns. We sit here today in 19 months of Zoom, and working over our laptops versus being in person for the most part. And that was a requirement not just for the individuals we serve, but the organizations that are providing the training, many of which that did not necessarily have all the technical competencies in order to be delivering that training in the most effective manner. They had to develop those skills. The individuals that they were training had to develop those skills more actively. So to some degree, there is a significant benefit from the pandemic in the sense that the future of work that was essentially accelerated overnight because of the pandemic shutting down and requiring us to be more technically proficient, it really moved people further along in the ability to do so. However, a significant portion of the population remains disconnected because they still do not have adequate broadband, do not have adequate computers and software, and will never be able to work remotely unless we're able to ensure that we're getting that type of technical support into every single household and every single community here in New York City, which I know has been a concern of many leaders, including the borough president, and of course, our current mayor has raised that concern and has addressed that in different strategies. But we need to get that effectively online, and I believe that is one of the biggest concerns that we'll face over the next 10 years as a sector. So the final report that I shared here is a blueprint that we worked on in partnership with the Association for Neighborhood Housing, or ANHD, and the Regional Plan Association, RPA. We, around 18 months ago, effectively came together as partners around the notion that that workforce development, economic development, and housing were of fundamental importance to every single individual here in this city. And in order for us to grow equitably, and not just have an economic boom as we have in the past, but that would leave significant portions of the population outside of that boom, that we needed to have a different approach to it and to take a holistic strategy to it. As a result of that strategy and that partnership, we selected a steering committee of around 18 individuals that represented 18 different areas that we believe are intersect with an effective, equitable solution, and would allow for people to grow in the city and thrive versus simply survive as they have for many, many years. Some of those intersections include food security, racial and social justice, issues around accessibility and disability, infrastructure, transit, things that continue to be concerned for many people. And so we developed this report with in large part because of that steering committee that drafted many of these different recommendations. And I highlight this report in particular because I think it really is of high importance as we think about the next 10 years and we think about new administrations, that we need to take a much more holistic approach to it versus simply thinking about it simply as employment and job training, but around the other areas that would allow for someone to not just successfully live in the long term, but also for them to access training and to be able to go through that successfully. Someone cannot go through a training program and receive new skills if they're hungry, if they're housing insecure, if they don't have access to proper transportation, if they are 45 minutes from a transportation hub, if they have other concerns within their community. So this report highlights a number of different areas. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'll talk through just some of the workforce recommendations. There are some pieces here that include addressing structural barriers that prevent people from participating in the workforce, as I've mentioned, increasing funding and support for dislocated workers to upskill them in the current or reskill them for new sectors, to create pathways to integrate immigrants with skills gained abroad in New York City's workforce. Obviously, immigrants are a huge portion of our population and bring incredible amount of skills and assets from different areas, many of which are not employable in the given sector that they've been trained as a result of the disparities with their curriculum and with their credentials. We also need to think within the community around ensuring that as I mentioned previously, that workforce and economic development is fundamentally aligned. So with that, we offer suggestions around ensuring that a portion, whether it's 1% or 10% of all economic development dollars, are always allocated to provide skills training for individuals that are going to reside in those communities and are going to be pipelined potentially into the jobs that would be coming online. Creating a permanent workforce development fund is of high importance. There are examples of this in a variety of different areas of the country, including in Texas and in Massachusetts, where a certain percentage of dollars that are generated from businesses, very minute percentage, in fact, less than 10% of 1%, would be allocated for workforce development and skills training in particular areas. Massachusetts has the most defined and one of the most successful versions of that type of fund. And we would love to obviously build the support to replicate such a fund here in New York City. We also need to invest specific communities that obviously have remained outside of the workforce for a harder reason, which is that they lack specific proficiencies in language, in math skills. They have reading deficits. These are programs that we call bridge programs or pre-apprenticeship programs that would allow for individuals to receive adequate training in order for them to then get into job training programs. These are people that are multiple steps removed from not an opportunity for employment, but from actual job training programs because they lack certain basic skills. So think of these as 100 level courses in the university, someone who requires a specific type of class in order to then take an accredited course. And that is defined actually in another report that I can drop into the chat after I've finished my comments. So we offer a variety of different solutions, including recreating the workforce system around specific KPI and other metrics in order to ensure that we are getting the types of outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. And of course, there are a number of other factors that include hiring practices on the employment side. We work very closely with employers to better understand whether or not individuals have the skills that they need, but we also need to put pressure on employers in order to ensure that they have hiring practices that are allowing for people to be considered for employment if they do have those skills. We know that companies have hiring practices that are outdated. There are a number of different consultancies and agencies like McKinsey and others that have put together data, have shared data and reports that says that there are specific credentials that are often asked for that are no longer required for someone to be successful in certain positions. And those often act as simply as gates in order to prevent people, whether intentionally or not, from getting employment in some of these jobs. And so we need to change that in order for us to change the outcome of unemployment, high unemployment numbers. We need to address that fact as well. One of the other points that was raised on the call, and I just wanted to address this, a number of other people have fallen out of the workforce, not because of actual skills or the requirement of upskilling, but because they just do not have adequate supports. And this really speaks to the inclusive growth model that I talked about before. Childcare remains an issue. The public school system continues to be in flux. There is not enough support for the main caregivers in the home. Women fell out of the workforce in astounding numbers for a variety of different reasons that included childcare. Of course, it also included them more often being caregivers for individuals that were sick in their homes. And that was obviously a drastic change during the months of COVID and the early months of COVID in particular. But if we don't address childcare, women will continue to be out of the workforce in large numbers. And that will, in the long term, affect lots of different positive pieces that we saw in terms of employment trends over the last decade, which was more women moving into management level positions and also executive level positions. The pandemic obviously disproportionately affected people of color in high numbers. We need to ensure that we're addressing some of the concerns around that, whether it is education and training or racial and other systemic biases. And obviously, the concerns around healthcare will continue to be an issue for folks returning back to work, so long as they don't have the vaccinations, as well as if they don't have proper PPE in order for them to transport and be able to use public transportation, et cetera. So those are just a number of recommendations and pieces that we've been studying and highlighting over the course of this period of time. We continue to find more information in real time from our members, as I mentioned, 190 organizations here in the city, but also partners at the state and federal level. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Jose, thank you very much. I have one, and then Jessica, you'll have to help me with others. Mine is with the money that has come in from the federal government, I guess some through the state. It was mentioned by George, obviously, that it's helping keep the city afloat. But also, have you noticed that any of it is going towards some of these suggestions that you're making? Is it possible to track? That would be my question.
Right now, it's not clear where all of those dollars are going for the current fiscal year, just because obviously we'll need to look back on some of that in the upcoming year. I did drop a report in the chat called the Follow the Money Report. It was done in partnership with our sister organization at the state called the NIATAP, as well as a partner here in New York City called Jobs First NYC. It does track dollars that have historically been allocated here in New York City in different agencies. And we see that the dollars currently sit around 23 different agencies, which is another major issue for tracking dollars here in New York City around workforce and skills. We do not have an employment agency. Obviously, the dollars are spread throughout SBS, DYCD, EDC, lots of different agencies, and it makes it increasingly difficult for us to have a more effective system. And that is in part also, if you look at the most senior levels within government, the deputy mayor and different agency leaders are only responsible for specific areas and priorities. And so that information is hard to track. Outcomes are hard to follow and to ensure that they're actually being achieved. But in terms of federal dollars, there's a significant investment obviously being made. We're hopeful that those dollars will be allocated for recovery purposes, for training, but also be allocated for infrastructure and green and climate jobs, areas that we believe there's an opportunity to train and reskill the workforce for new jobs here over the next 10 years.
Okay, I know you and I have talked about the lack of coordination. I could go on and on about it. The other question I have is the community colleges. I am a supporter, as I guess Dr. Biden is, and we'll see what happens in Washington, of free community colleges. But everybody talks about them being a catalyst for some of what you described. Do you think that's possible?
Absolutely. I mean, CUNY and just the city college system in general needs to be more effectively aligned to workforce trends. If you look in other regions of the country, obviously New York City is an anomaly in the sense that the human services sector is in large part operating the job training programs and workforce programs. And that's for reasons that obviously the city was set up to do so. The city could not provide a number of different services for its constituency and therefore created this human services structure in order to do so. And so as a result of that, these organizations are providing workforce training as well. And they are well positioned to do so because they have the cultural competencies and understand the needs of these different communities and can be effective. However, in other areas of the country, the city college or community college system is really the workforce tool. So we need organizations like CUNY and the individual colleges associated with it to be more effectively aligned. Many organizations of the colleges are doing an incredible job around that. You know that, Borough President, that obviously colleges like Manhattan Community College,
GMCC,
LaGuardia Community College are incredible examples of that. Kingsborough, Lehman, they're doing really good work around workforce. Again, however, because of CUNY structure, it's not incredibly aligned in a cohesive strategy. These are individual entities that are operating individual strategies and programs. And so more collectively, I know that the chancellor is thinking more holistically around that strategy, but it is a fundamental and of high importance for CUNY to be effectively supporting employment trends and be shifting some of their credentials and degree programs to be more aligned to employment trends. So the CUNY is a partner, a member, and is a leading voice that's necessary in this this next period.
All right, thank you. Jessica, can you help me with seeing if there are questions?
I don't see any hands up. If anyone has anything, can jump in, but there's no hands up.
All right. Do you have a question, Jessica?
Yeah, I mean, I know we're trying to end right on time, but I just had a quick question really about sort of the nature of training. I mean, we found it with students in education, it's not just about getting the, students technologically, online, but, really retraining teachers. And I'm just wondering, with all the employment training programs becoming, either hybrid or online, what kind of retraining there is to do for the people running those programs, because it seems like, sort of remote, especially in many areas of job training, is a real challenge.
Yeah, and I referenced that earlier. I mean, it was a real challenge in the beginning of the pandemic, and it continues to be. Obviously, I don't think the workforce sector is any different than any other sector in the sense that majority of the population is not technologically savvy beyond the use of an iPhone or some tool that they're using on a fairly regular basis. And we need people to be more technically proficient, and that includes instructors, educators that are conducting the training, because if they're not comfortable with different devices and different software, then the folks that they're training are not going to be able to be comfortable with it. And if they're not comfortable with it, the programs can't pivot to being much more technically proficient and meet the needs of different employers. We need to be, as a sector, using the same types of tools that the employers that we hope for the individuals to be developed for are using as well, so that when they go there, they're being trained on how to be a good employee, not necessarily use software that they haven't used because are 5 generations behind in terms of the use of that technology. So we do need a Marshall Plan essentially around technology and the use of it. And that can change when we provide more access to good quality technology. People need quality internet. They need good to be able to use tools beyond just simply typing on a computer or a smartphone. They need all of the tools that are required for them to become proficient.
Right. One other question. I'm sure that they're part of your task force, Jose, but the CTEs, meaning the Department of Education CTEs, are they part of the task force it is an interesting problem because again, sort of like the community college, there's no holistic approach to the CTEs from what I can see. And also many students who want to be EMS or plumbers, the parents say, hell no, I didn't come to this country for you to do that. You're going to college. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of work to be done. I've been on many panels when this has all come up. So I'm just wondering if the CTE folks are part of your task force, et cetera.
CTE has been a part of our strategy and continues to be a part of our strategy. I think that the notion that particular populations in this country, especially those that have immigrated to the country, want to obviously have their children pursue a higher degree in education is not necessarily going to change. I think what we need to do, however, is to show higher value in those areas and teach individuals that you can have a higher income, that utilizing some of the skills that they have that can align to an area that doesn't appear to be as sexy as some of the other areas that one might pursue in a degree. And I think and we do, I would not say need to deprioritize the degree. I think we just need to rebrand it for the purpose of specific areas. And that will take a certain amount of time. But we do, technical skills are important. There are well-paid jobs. We continue as a sector to provide training in those areas. And a number of those areas will continue to rebound. But that is an area that we're focused on as well.
Okay. You're awesome as usual. And I didn't know Jessica was anything else. Otherwise, I think we can close out this amazingly informative discussion.
Right, no more questions, that's it.
Okay. We
Thank
do
you.
try to end at 4, which is what we're doing. I want to thank you, Jose Ortiz and George and Matt, for amazingly informative information. And we look forward to next Tuesday at 3 o'clock. And we will send out to the entire group the material, both the wonderful materials that George provided and the report information that Jose provided. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.